Well, I grew up in kind of a charismatic Christian home. I was born in Puerto Rico. My grandfather was actually a pastor and planted many churches throughout Puerto Rico and some other places. And so I kind of grew up in this kind of Pentecostal environment. And I believe my mom really loved the Lord. My dad was a newer Christian. And but as I grew up, what I really, the way I interpreted the faith, the way I interpreted Christianity was like this rule book. And I thought if I had a good day, then God was happy with me. And if I had a bad day, then he was not happy with me. So there was a lot of pressure to always perform. And because of that, I got very involved. I became a do-gooder. I got very involved in church. That was the most important thing. It was important that I was involved in church and that I was seen being involved in church. Because that way people could be like, oh yeah, Sam's cool. He's got it going. That's how I kind of interpret it. Now, what ended up happening at some point, and I don't really know when that was. It could have been probably when I was 13 years old. It could have been when I was 20. At some point, I started to just realize the power of Christ's sacrifice, of Christ's death and resurrection. I started to feel more like God saved me rather than I was saving myself. And that kind of took me on this journey where I was trying to find a place where that was the center of the teaching. And that's how I kind of got to H2O. And I was kind of in a moment, because I had this thing where I was like Mr. Do-gooder, Mr. Rule follower, and the pendulum kind of swung the other way, where I started understanding God's grace more, but it got to where God's grace was way over on the other side, the pendulum swung way over the other way, where there wasn't this thing called sin that was serious, that we do grieve God with our sin. And so when I came to H2O, I was actually in that point. I was actually in that kind of place in my life where the pendulum had swung the other way, where I didn't really care what I did. And what I found was at H2O a place where God's grace was number one, but reverence for his word, respect for his law, was also number one. So I found a group of people that were committed to living godly lives, but were filled with grace, and that really kind of just brought it all in and made it make sense.